Very good evening to everyone. We are here with yet another virtual session. And today we are here with Janvi Parekh. She is currently pursuing her MPhil in clinical psychology from MIT University, Lucknow. And she is a certified career counselor and a graphologist and having interest in research, content writing, and many more other things. She is promoting mental health through writing blogs, and she have co-authored and published an original research paper in the International Journal of Social Sciences. With this small introduction to Janvi, I welcome you on our platform. Thank you so much to give a time to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So let's just jump right into it. Today I'll be talking about clinical interview. The word has been really used and misused over the years. So let's just have some clarity over it, and then we can jump into questions if you have any. So starting with clinical interview, I would like to first pose a question to everyone. Is it a myth or a fact that diagnosis is given only through testing and assessment? So most of the people I think would answer that diagnosis is given only through testing and assessment, considering this as a fact, but it's actually a myth. So diagnosis can actually be given if you take a thorough case history or a clinical interview. You most probably get a diagnosis during that time itself. However, we go ahead and do the testing and assessments to confirm whether the diagnosis we are assuming, that is a prognosis we are assuming, is supporting the our treatment plan and even the differential diagnosis we are thinking about. So with that, I would like to even present a case which I had seen a year back. So a girl, this is only with the case history example and nothing more. So there was a girl, 18-year-old, currently pursuing a fashion designing. She was referred for counseling because she was experiencing low mood, crying spells, sleeplessness, difficulty dealing with rejection from the mother and friends, emotional isolation, and difficulty in communicating feelings openly since the last 3 months. So most of us must have guessed that it's a case of depression. So based on the chief complaints, presenting complaints, and even history of presenting illness, we are able to identify what could be the diagnosis. So based only on the case history and clinical interview, we could get so much information. So that is how we can move ahead with the correct way of taking a case history or a clinical interview. So starting with what is clinical interview? So clinical interview is a face-to-face interaction between a patient and a mental health professional, wherein the mental health professional asks questions, takes interview questions, and even observes the patient during the whole hour to understand their behavior, attitude, personality, and even take their life history to understand whether there could be any contributing factors. And there are three ways we could take up a clinical interview. One could be a structured way, a semi-structured way, or an unstructured way. So starting with structured, it is a standard interview. So how do we describe that? So basically, it's like, let's take an example of DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Disorders. So taking DSM, we have SCID 5, that is Structured Clinical Interview for Disorders for DSM 5. So we have a set of questions given in it. And based on the questions, we ask those questions to our patients and they give us the answers. And through that, we understand their symptoms, their classification of disorder, and their diagnosis. So that's a structured way to do it. Then we have an unstructured way. So that's a non-directive interview. So there are no pre-arranged questions here. You just determine what, like you just take a flow of the question. So what you ask, then what is the reply? Then you go ahead and ask another question and it goes on and so forth. So that's a non-directive, unstructured way of interviewing the patient. And we also have a semi-structured way. So that's a pre-set list of flexible questions. So your flexible questions, so you take some guidance from the standardized interview, and then you ask questions based on the flow of the interview. So this gives a clinician more fluidity, as well as they are somewhere structured so that they don't miss out on any points. So that's the three ways we can go ahead and take clinical interviews. today I would like to focus on structured one, rather non-structured one, but having some amount of structured. So this is how we write case histories. This is how we present our cases and even give the reports to the patient. So we go ahead and view each of the aspects of it in the smallest way possible. So starting with, we ask the patients the identifying data. So the basic social demographic details about the name, age, gender, where do they live, their occupation, marital relationship status, what languages do we speak. So again, languages is important because we might be conducting assessment with them. We would be communicating throughout the whole period of 1 hour. So if they don't understand English and we keep communicating in English, it's not going to help. We need to switch languages based on what we know, on what they know. So if at all there is no common grounds of language, we might refer the patient to someone else. Then about handedness, whether they are right-handed or left-handed, again, this could give us some information about their brain functioning, whether they are left brain functioning individuals or right brain functioning individuals, even religion and socioeconomic status. So that could help us understand what socio-cultural background they belong to. Then we take details and information about informant. So informant is an individual who has brought the patient to us or who is accompanying the patient. So we see their relation with the patient, whether they know the complete details of their illness and what are the length of acquaintance, their reliability of information, whether the information they have provided is reliable or adequate. So reliable, whether what they are providing and what the patient has told us are matching or not, and adequate, whether the information we have received is enough for us to come to a diagnosis or come to at least a form of testing which is required. And then we can also have information about referred, like who referred them and the reason for referral. So like the case we saw earlier, there was a reason for referral because the patient was having crying spells. So that is why she was referred to me, a counselor, by a psychiatrist. So referred by a psychiatrist. Moving forward, we have presenting complaints. So presenting complaints are the verbatim complaints reported by the patient. So we quote unquote mention them, all the symptoms are mentioned in chronological order and since how long those complaints have been presented. So for example, I've not been sleeping since 5 years regularly. So it could be as basic as that or as detailed as 2 दिन से मुझे बहुत बुरा लग रहा है, कोई भी कुछ बोल कर जा रहा है तो मुझे बहुत खराब लग रहा है. So this could be quote unquote, we mentioned that, and it should be mentioned in chronological order of their duration. So the 5 years should be mentioned before and then the 2 days would be mentioned below in the last. So that is how we report presenting complaints. Moving forward to chief complaints. So chief complaints is how the clinician thinks or understands the presenting complaints. So when we say, I'm crying since 5 years every single day, so you mentioned about the crying spells. So it's in clinical words, in technical words, but not in diagnostic words. So you directly don't mention that the patient has been in depressed mood since 5 years. So that's, you are mentioning in technical terms, but not in diagnostic words. Then we also define what is the mode of onset, like when was the mode of onset. So was it abrupt, that is within 2 days, then acute, that is from few hours to 2 weeks period, and insidious, that is more than 2 weeks. Then we move ahead to course of illness. So whether the episode has, like whether the illness has been continuous, like since 5 years the thing has been repeating itself continuously, or whether it is episodic, like there is 1 month period where things are happening, then there is a 5 months period where nothing is happening, then again an episode is coming, and fluctuating, whether it's coming and going, coming and going, in simple words. Then progress of illness. So whether the illness is improving or deteriorating or static, like there is no change whatsoever, and fluctuating, again and a graph which is not stable at all. And then we concentrate on the 4 P's of factors in illness. So one, we have predisposing, that is their vulnerability. So it could be genetic vulnerability, social vulnerability, like lack of housing or lack of emotional warmth, or any other kind of predisposing vulnerabilities, could be even seizures for that matter. So that is predisposing. Then we have perpetuating, that is the maintaining factors, that what is maintaining the illness. So in case of probably smoking or addiction, it could be the maintaining factors could be this level of stress. Then what are the triggering factors? That is the precipitating factors. So triggers could be when they are feeling emotional or when they are feeling lonely, they want to take a cigarette out. And what are the protective factors, the limiting factors? Like their illness is not expanding itself. It's there, but it's protecting itself from deteriorating further. So the protective factors could be support, social support, family support could be that. Moving forward, we have history of presenting illness. So basically, we now elaborate the chief complaints in detail. So we talk more in detail about the onset, what are the symptoms, which the hierarchy of onset. So which symptoms came first, which symptom came next, and so on and so forth. And the duration of each symptom. So 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. So we go in a chronology. Then we have intensity. How severe is the intensity? So in that case, it could be like crying spells could be extremely severe and extremely difficult to maintain, but the person is able to manage the sleep. So if the person is not sleeping for 2 days, the third day person might sleep. So intensity for sleeplessness is lower than compared to crying spells. Then we have frequency. How many times does it happen in a week or in a month? We need to take a note of that. And whether there is an intermittent period, that is a period with no symptoms. So is there a day when the person has not smoked or not taken alcohol in a week? So we might inquire about what made them not consume that. So that could help us to plan a therapy session with them. That if the person was busy with the family or busy with work or something like that, we could use that as a medium in the therapy. Then we have the location. So sometimes, like in cases of PTSD, people have some triggers looking at the location. So a place where the symptoms might exaggerate itself, and the coping mechanisms which they take on. So most of the people, whether it's physical illness or it's mental illness, they know their way out to come, like at least manage the symptoms time being. So if the person is crying and they might just call up a friend and talk about it and they might feel better. So that is their coping mechanism. So we take all this detail in their chronology to understand from where did it start and where it is now, like in the end of it. So we can, on these grounds, we can plan our treatment, whether they need therapy, pharmacotherapy, or whether they need some other kinds of therapy that might help them. Moving forward, we have day-to-day functioning, part of history of presenting illness itself. So we take information about their biological functioning, whether they are sleeping well or not, what kind, like is it disturbed sleep or the sleep is fine. Then appetite, have they increased the appetite or not eating or binge eating, emotional eating, could be any of those factors. Then the weight, whether they have increased weight or reduced their weight. So in cases of depression, especially, people tend to reduce weight. But if people are emotional eating and binge eating out of sadness, then it could also be the factor of increasing the weight in a short period of span. So that could help us understand their illness better. And whether they have physical discomfort. So in cases of psychosomatic disorders, we have people complaining about like any body ache, headache, and when CT scans and MRIs are done, no information is coming out. There is no issues in the body and biological functioning. So it could give us an idea that the factor contributing could be psychosomatic. So we need to understand physical discomfort as well. Moving forward, there's social functioning. So whether they are talking to people, other people, sharing their issues, are they having any difficulty in their interpersonal relationships? Like in the case we discussed earlier, the girl had issues with the mother and the mother wasn't supportive enough and understanding enough. So that is one of the contributing factors. And then we have personal hygiene, whether the person is managing their own physical health and taking bath regularly or not, maintaining proper grooming, and they're well kept or not. We need to understand that. Again, could be a factor in even bipolar disorder or depression. Moving forward, we have their negative history and treatment history. So negative history, simply stated, is what have not happened to them. So what could not be a factor that is causing their illness. So history of trauma, brain fever, epilepsies, accidents, injuries, could be anything. Even physical illnesses like diabetes and hypertension could be considered in this case. So all these factors are not there. We have ruled these out to understand the diagnosis, to understand their problem and their treatment history, whether they have taken any treatment previously or not, whether they have visited a counselor or a psychiatrist or any other physician, and have they taken any medicines for that, and whether the medicines was like the compliance and adherence to the treatment was good or not. So did the person just start taking 2 or 3 days of medicines and then stop altogether, or the person is managing that and taking regular care of their medicines and other treatment plans. So that's what we look over here. So we understand whether or not our treatment plan would be having any effect on it or not. So if the person is not taking medicines, then we might work our way out into counseling and therapy. But if the person is compliant enough and adhering to the treatment plan, then we might include both the therapy plans and then move forward. Moving on, we have past psychiatric and medical illness. So here we take all the information about their hospitalizations, treatment plans, what kind of treatment they've already received. So that might have worked, that might not have worked. So we take it forward to what could work now. Then whether there was a recovery period or not, medications they have been using. So sometimes medicines could also have a side effect into any other form. So we need to consider that as well. Whether there was trauma, accident, or injuries that could cause the disorder right now. Do they have any allergies? In that case, some medicines would not be prescribed to them by the psychiatrist. And even do they have a history of seizures or epilepsy? So that could also be a contributing factor to many psychological disorders. Moving on, we have family history. So in the family history, we have many details about the family itself. So starting from their number of family members in the house, what kind of house do they live in, is the person who is the person closest to, were there any recent deaths in the family, so that recent death could be the cause of many disorders. Then were there any financial crisis that could have lead to higher stress levels. How is their relationship with each family member, whether they are maintaining a good relationship with one person or all the person, or they do not have a cordial relationship with any person. Then is there a history of physical illness like cardiac arrest or hypertension, diabetes, could be any of those. And history of psychiatric illness also, whether the person was any family member was involved in any substance use, or in they were like taken to a rehabilitation center or a psychiatric center for any other disorder treatment or something like that. So we take details of all of this and create a genogram. So this is how a genogram looks. So we have male, female, then we measure, like if the male, so in this case, the female is the client and she is given an arrow. So this indicates that this person is our client and this is the family patterns. So we have gender not known or adopted child, foster child, could be many. These are the basic symbols, but we have many symbols in this case. And when the person dies, we give a cross to them. So that means the person is no more in the family genogram as of now. And whether they are married, so if the person is married, we give a connection over here. So that is how a genogram looks. So this helps us to understand the family patterns and what is causing, like, is there a physical or a genetic factor that is causing the disorder. Moving forward, we have personal history. So this is the longest part of clinical interviewing, where we start from the birth and early development to their present living conditions. All of this is taken into consideration before giving a treatment plan or a diagnosis or taking up any testing modality as well. So starting with birth and early development, we have the prenatal history, where whether the pregnancy was, like, the conception was planned or unplanned. Were there any complications? Did the person, like the client, when born, cried immediately? Did the person have any breathing issues? Were there any defects like a cleft lip or anything like that? Whether it was a full-term delivery or a premature, late delivery, normal delivery, cesarean delivery, It could even be a forceps delivery. So when the forceps is taken, is used to taking the child out, that could also hamper their brain development, because there's a lot of pressure in the heads, in the temples as well. So that could help us understand that. Then any other mother experiencing any concerns, like mother experiencing high fever or anxiety or depression, preterm or post partum as well, that is okay. So that also helps us to understand whether there are any genes involved or not. Then we take up details about their early childhood, so their developmental milestones, whether they started to crawl, walk, and sit, all of those things on the correct time period, which is expected out of a child. Whether they had any separation or stranger anxiety, did the child throw temper tantrums, or they had any bedwetting or bed soiling issues. Could be all the issues could be a factor causing now the illness. So we need to understand that as well. Then we go ahead to middle and late childhood. So did the child or the person experience any bullying at school, at home, from friends, from teachers, could be anyone? Did the punishment or abuse cause any trauma to the child? Did the person face any learning disabilities? Or how was their puberty and menstruation period going on? Whether they understand how things happen to a physical body during those period, during those developing years. So whether they had the information about it or not, or whether it was taken in a shock period or shock manner, and then we psychoeducate the client about that as well. Then we have details about their adulthood, so their educational or scholastic history. So till what age, or what till what age did they pursue their education? When did they start their education? What is their highest education qualification? How was their academic performance? All of this is taken into consideration. Then we have occupational history. So where were there switching of jobs? What age did they started working? So if a person starts working at the age of 14, then we might inquire whether there were any monetary or financial concerns. That is the reason the person started working early. Because in Indian society, we usually start working at the age of 21 or 22. Then we take up details about their social activities. So how do they maintain their friendship and their family life? Do they connect well with people? Do they have any issues with that? Then the legal history. So are there any ongoing cases, and what are the cause of the cases? Any other problems in that case, because it could turn into a medical legal case and we need to refer it to the concerned person then. So legal history is equally important. Then marital and relationship history. So when did they get married? Were there any past relationships, and did they have any issues in the present relationship? Are they happy? All of the details are taken in consideration. Did they have a love marriage, arranged marriage? All of those, and whether the marriage was like willfully agreed by both the parties or not. Moving forward to sexual history. When did they start? When was the first sexual active phase of their life? Then do they understand their sexuality? Do they have any fantasies, any sexual abuse in that matter? Do they have satisfaction in their sexual life, or do they visit a commercial sex worker? So in that case, AIDS would be taken into consideration, and all of those factors come in, whether they could be causing the illness or not. Then we have fantasies and dreams, whether they have daydreams, like what kind of daydreams do they have? What are the nightmares? What are their fears and phobias that they avoid in their life? These factors come in. Then we have religion and values. So do they really believe in their religion, or they want to convert themselves, or what are their beliefs in? What are their values? Do they they are this the spiritual aspect one, or they are fully religious? These factors come in, because sometimes a religion could also be causing, or religious factors could also be causing the disorder. Then we have habits and behavioral addictions. So here the major substance use, compulsions, obsessions, addictions, all of these things come over here. So addictions here could also be of gaming, mobile phones, internet addiction. Then substance use and substance use history. So when did they started consuming any substance, how did they start, how did they get money for the substance, and then what was the quantity they first started and where they are right now in the quantity wise. So that is about substance. Then compulsions and obsessions. Do they have constant thinking about something, whether I feel contaminated, you are contaminated, or I need to wash my hands because I looked at something. Something on those grounds will give you idea about compulsions and obsessions. So these are the basic factors of adulthood. Moving forward, we have pre-morbid personality. So here, pre-morbid means before illness personality. So before the illness, how was the person? So if the illness started like 15 years ago, then we take the illness pre-morbid 15 years back. So what were the social relations 15 years ago? So did they gel up well with people, or were they alone? Did they worked well with people around them, or they were constantly fighting with others? All of those things. Then their intellectual activities, hobbies, and use of leisure time. So here, do they like reading, writing? What are their hobbies? Do they like doing something over other things? How do they use their leisure time? By talking to people, by spending time with family, or being alone with their books, or gaming? It could be any of those factors. Then what was their predominant mood? Were they a happy-go-lucky person in general terms, or were they always alone, shy, or sad most of the times? It could be any of those things. That's a predominant mood. What were they most likely in the mood of? Then what was the character of an individual? So their attitude towards work and responsibility. Were they taking their work seriously or not? Going on time, being punctual, disciplined. Then attitude to self. How did they look about how did they look themselves in the mirror? What do they think about themselves? What is their own thinking about themselves? That is attitude to self. Then the interpersonal relationships. How is their relationship with family, friends, and any other close individuals? And how are their standards in moral and religious matters, even health matters? So earlier the person wasn't religious, but once the disorder stepped into the picture, then they started being religious, thinking that I will do this for the God, and the God would take this away from me. Or if I pray to God every single day, they will take my sadness away. It could be these drastic differences also. Then health matters. So earlier they were very concerned about their health, but now they are not, or vice versa. And energy levels and work initiative. So in cases of depression, their energy levels usually reduce. So they don't feel like getting out of the bed. So they don't want to work really. So in that case, we ask about their pre-morbid personality, whether earlier they used to do that or not, whether they used to like to get out of the bed, do their work without any push whatsoever. Then their fantasy life. So here the daydreaming factors come in, and content of daydreaming. So earlier they used to daydream about having a very like a very good successful life, having a set career or education or something on those grounds. And now probably after the illness, they only think about their everyday problems, everyday stressors. That is their daydreaming patterns. So that is what is looked into consideration. Then the habits. So were they consuming any substances or any other factors, any habits? Even it could be an eating habit. So earlier they used to binge eat and now they don't, or any other factors that could be part of the habits. Then impression. So impression here talks about what the clinician thinks about the pre-morbid personality. So whether the person was having any kind of personality which could be very sharp, distinctive, that could lead them to the disorder. So if the person had some obsessions, then we can say the person had ruminative features, or had some compulsions that could lead them to OCD now. So that their impression about the complete personality. Moving forward, coming to the last part, that is mental status examination. So when we take clinical interview, on the first session itself, we take the mental status examination. Why is this important? Like we go to a physical doctor, they take our vitals every single time we go. So that is how we do MSc. we take our mental vitals every single visit. So the clinician takes that during the 1 hour period. So starting with general appearance, like as soon as a person stepped into the clinic, the person was well groomed or not, well kempt or not, how are their hair looking, nails looking, and any of their, were they tidy or not. In general, how did they look physically? Then moving forward, we have attitude towards examiner. So whether they were like talking to the examiner in cordial manner or not, or were they interested, not interested, or uh, any other factors towards the examiner. So were they forced to come here, so they were not answering well, or they were cooperative enough, attentive enough. So that factors. Then we have rapport. So when we talk to the person initially for the first time, we make a rapport with them so that they give out the details, because as we understand, we cannot just step into a clinic to a random person. We won't tell our life story. So once the rapport is established, only then they would be open enough to share their stories with us. So was the rapport well established, easily established, difficult to establish? All those needs to be mentioned. Then their motor behavior. So in case of schizophrenia or even depression, there could be psychomotor retardation where the person's body is slouched, or they are walking very slowly, talking really slowly, or it could be in case of mania, they are very hyperactive. So many such motor behavior needs to be observed and needs to be written. So mental status examination is mostly observed, also inquired. So inquired is when we ask the person about their different factors, and observed is what the clinician observes about the patient, and we take a note of it. Then we go ahead and take a speech and voice sample also. So speech sample is a neutral speech sample. So we just ask them, what do you think about India? So a neutral speech is what they like. They are not triggered by anything, and we ask them a very general question, and we verbatim note down their answer. So what do you think about India? I think India is a great place to live in. So it's a very neutral statement which they respond to, and with that we can help understand their intensity, pitch, quality of their voice and speech, their reaction time, whether they took a lot of time to respond to the statement, or they took a lesser time and respond very quickly. Then whether there was any coherence, goal direction. So what I asked and what they responded is matching or not. Then were the productivity of the statement. So were the statement like really having a full statement, or was it only in words? Were the person replying in words? Whether the speech was relevant or not. So these things are taken into consideration, because these things do have relevance in their disorder, their clinical features, their symptomology, and their diagnosis as well. Moving forward, we have mood and affect. So we take a subjective evaluation as well as an objective evaluation. So subjective evaluation is just simply we ask them, "Aaj aapko kaisa महसूस हो रहा है? How do you feel today?" And whatever they answer, we take that verbatim. And objective evaluation is taken through these factors which we discuss, or we observe and we inquire. So whether there's appropriate mood. So if we are talking about grief and they are smiling about the grief, there could be inappropriateness or incongruency. Then whether they are reactive to things. If I'm talking about something which is disturbing them, are they showing that on their face or not? Then is there any diurnal variation? So in the morning they are feeling upset, by the night they are feeling better, or opposite. Then relatedness. So what they are talking about and how their emotional expressions and facial expressions are related or not. What is the mood quality? Whether they are euthymic, that is a normal mood, or dysthymic, in depressed mood, or many such mood qualities. Could be angry, frustration, anxiety, could be any of those things. Then fluctuations. So labile or even. So labile is when they change their mood very often. So in a minute they are happy, in a minute they are sad. Even is stable mood. Then we have range. So range is broad or restricted. So broad is when they're showing all the facial expressions based on what we are talking about. And restricted is they are not showing us much of the expressions. They are restricting themselves to express. Then intensity, whether it's blunted, flat, or shallow. So blunted is they're showing a little of emotions, but not much. Flat is they're completely flat. That's a straight face. They are not showing any of the emotions, what they're talking about, what we are talking about. And shallow is showing a little of emotions, but not that much. So a lower than blunted as well. And then we have mobility. So whether it's constructed, fixed, or labile. So mobility is whether they're changing the mood based upon the topics they're discussing. So whether it's constructed, whether they're happy, so they're happy throughout, or so that's fixed, or constricted is they have some difficulty in moving from one place to another, one emotion to another, and labile changing continuously. Then we have thought. So thought is what their stream, form, possession, and content is all about. So stream is how their flow of thoughts are coming in. Then what is the form of thoughts? Their possession, whether they have obsessions, compulsions, or content. Do they have delusions or preoccupations with some amount of thought? We take that into consideration. Whether there are flight of ideas, so they move from one topic to another very rapidly. Derailment also. So then we have perception, where we take into factors illusions, hallucinations, and any other phenomena. So illusions is basically if there's a rope in the wall or in the room, and do they see the rope as rope itself, or they see it as a snake, like we see in Mulalai illusion. So if the arrow is pointing inwards, we might think it's a smaller arrow, and when it's moving outwards or shown outwards, we find it's longer or bigger. So such kinds of illusions, that's a normal basic illusion, we might all be susceptible to it, but we just inquire about it. Then hallucinations could be auditory, visual, tactile, all the kinds of hallucinations possible, so we inquire about it कि आपको लगता है कि यहाँ मतलब so we basically ask them in a non-offending manner. So we can ask them, आपको कुछ दिखाई दे रहा है जो किसी और को नहीं दिखाई दे रहा, आपको कोई आवाजें सुनाई दे रही जो किसी और को भी नहीं सुनाई दे रही और वो सिर्फ आपसे बात कर रही है. So we describe them in a non-offending manner, so they're open about it. Otherwise, they might feel guarded and defensive and not give us the information. Then we have cognition. So orientation is one of the factors in cognition, whether they know the time, place, and person they are at. So time could be what hour of the day it is. Place, where are you right now? So are you in a clinic or in a hospital or in a counseling center? And person, like who is this like person, clinician, who am I, or who is this informant with them? So that is orientation. Then attention and concentration. Throughout this 1.5 hours when we were chatting, was the attention maintained and easily sustained, or was it difficult to arouse their attention, or were they distracted most of the times? That is taken into consideration. Then we have memory. So we have immediate, recent, and remote memories. So immediate is now, like what was the last thing we were talking about. Then we have recent, आज सुबह आपने नाश्ते में क्या खाया था. And remote could be like what was the date of birth, simple as that. Then we have abstract ability. So we test this in 2-3 ways. So one is proverbs. So we give them a proverb to understand whether they have abstract reasoning or not. So could be ईद का चांद का मतलब क्या है. So we take a proverb and we ask them to explain it. And then we have similarities and differences. So similarities and differences could be explained in one example, like orange or banana mein, what are the similarities and what are the differences. So similarities could be both are fruits and both are edibles, and differences could be one is in orange color, one is in yellow color, and one is shorter, one is longer. So to understand whether they have abstract reasoning or not, or whether they have concrete reasoning, like what is visible, they only report that. And their intelligence. So here we also ask them about numerical abilities. We question them about calculations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all of these factors, counting backwards, counting forwards, to test their intelligence, and even general fund of knowledge. So who is the Prime Minister of India? So we get the answer, and that is how we understand their intelligence level. In basic terms, so below average, average, could be above average, and then we go ahead and figure out later on if we need it's below average, we might take up an IQ testing forward. Then we take information about judgment. So again, a three types to assess that: social, personal, and test. So social is basically observing the person in their social life. So whether they're talking to other people, So this is mostly done in inpatient settings where we can observe the patient throughout the day, and we see whether they're chatting with other patients or not, how they're communicating with others. That is how we do a social examination. Then a personal examination is we ask them, what are your plans once you get out of this facility? What are you going to do with yourself? What are you going to do with your family? What are your future plans? And then test is you give them a situation. So like अगर आपके घर में आग लगी है तो आप क्या करोगे? So to test their judgment, whether they would be making calls to the fire department, or whether they would be trying to like make sure that there's water and sand in the house and try to uh, fumigate that or expand that or try to control the fire, could be any of those factors. So that is how we test the judgment. And then we have insight. So we ask questions about various things like, do you think the treatment is helping you? Do you think what kind of illness do you have? Why are you brought to the hospital? Could be any such questions where we understand whether they have the awareness or not for their illnesses. So there is straight up denial that I do not have any illnesses, I'm forced here to stay, or there is slight awareness, I think I have some issues, but I don't know what that is. Or they could say, I know I have issues, but it's because of them. So it's because of the external factors. Then whether they have intellectual insight, they know everything about their diseases, their illnesses, and they know what is causing it. And we have true emotional insight. So again, similar, a higher version that than the previous one. So do they know what is causing it and how do they stop them? But this is usually very rare. It's mostly from denial to intellectual insight, which people do have. But yeah, true emotional insight is also possible. So this is the in gist of how do we take clinical interview. There's a lot in detail, but due to lack of time, I cannot go into all the details. It would take at least 3 to 4 hours to cover everything. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. It covers a lot more what we wanted to learn. There are a few questions which I wanted to ask regarding what interview, how it should be. So whenever patient comes to us, the information might not be reliable.
Right.
How do a clinician confirms or psychologist confirm that this is a reliable information?
Right. So, okay, first of all, we talk to the patient. So patient gives their whole point of view about what is what, where is it causing, how did it move forward, all of the details about the illnesses. Then we, if informant is present, we talk to the informant and we see whether the story is matching or not. If the story is matching, we might consider it reliable and adequate. And for example, if the informant is not available, then we might have to take the verdict of the patient because there is no other sources, and understand it as it's reliable and adequate and move forward to that. Also, there could be another option where we take details and information from the previous reports and case files. So we ask for their previous treatment plans and previous histories and previous doctors' examinations and all of that to consider whether what they are saying is true or not, to match that. So that is how we measure reliability and adequacy.
Yes. So my next question is like when we take MSc and it's a very vast measurement, what we say. So how do you think that a student should start learning MSc and start taking from patient? What is the process? Because MSc is a very typical and skillful process. So how do you have learned and how do you think that a student should learn in that process of?
Right. So students, if they have the clinical exposure, like if they're lucky enough, given the COVID times, to visit a hospital or have any patients around them whom they can chat with, they can start with bedside MSc. So bedside is MSc is basically just going to the patient's ward and in the room, and you ask them, how do you feel today? खाना खाया कि नहीं? खाने में क्या खाया? नींद आई कि नहीं? कल रात को खाने में क्या खाया था? So in general, you just chat with the person and take all the information possible. Then you slowly and gradually take the flow towards a proverb. आपको पता है ये proverb का मतलब क्या है, कि इन दोनों के बीच में difference क्या है, similarities क्या है. कि now I'll give you a situation. So situations का आप क्या करोगे, आप मेरे जगह पे होते तो, like you just chat with the person and take all the information possible, and then you make sure that all the information is available. If not, then you go ahead and inquire more. So you start with basic rapport, where you get most of the information about their mood, about their cognitions, even about their judgment and other social grooming or social awareness and grooming, and all of those things is mostly available when you first chat for the 5 minutes with the patient. And definitely they can read more about it, read more about MSCs. There are many sources available online. We can understand each factor, and then they can question on those lines as well.
Definitely. And my understanding of that is like you should explain and experience practical exposure in your departments. My next question is to be about what are the different techniques which are there to take any clinical interview, or is there this only the technique you have presented, or is there any technique or any way of asking questions are available to different kind of patients, psychiatric patients?
Right. Yes, there are many structured interview sets ready. Like I mentioned, there's KID 5. So there you have set of questions ready, and based on questions, you take up follow-up questions. So starting with what is your name, what is your address, blah, 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 and move forward to the final illness, like since when have the illness started? Then then the next follow-up question is, okay, where does the illness usually present itself? So set of questions are already available in the question, and you just look at the question, ask the patient, and note down whatever the answers are. So that's a structured way to go ahead with it. But usually here, the patient should be intellectual enough to answer you in that way. So patients are usually, when they are in psychosis or neurosis, or they are guarded and defensive, when you ask them in such a set robotic manner, they might not reply to you, and your rapport, instead of increasing, would reduce for the therapy session. So usually we prefer unstructured sessions, or at least semi-structured sessions, where we start with a question, then we go ahead and pick things from what they say, and then formulate a different question and take the history. So that helps better.
Yeah, my last question is about there is a condition known as autistic spectrum disorder and ADHD. There are two different psychiatric conditions. How do you deal with, and what are the things in the first we have to take care when we ask anything to children or any kind of age?
Okay, so can you just rephrase your question? What exactly are you looking for autism and ADHD?
Like, how do you deal with the clinical interviews for these kind of patients?
Okay. So in cases of autism and ADHD, usually we rely on their parents to give out all the information, because most of the children with autism do not really like to speak to people, strangers. A lot of rapport is taken into consideration before they start speaking, or they don't speak at all. There is no speech development. And in case of ADHD, some children are so hyperactive that they won't sit and talk to you. They would just run around or play with things, and you might not get information a lot from them. But if at all they open up, we can ask mainly about their school life, because if something is happening behind the school doors, the parents won't be aware about it. So to understand their perspective, we usually ask them about that, and even whether there is any kind of abuse which parents don't know about. So physical abuse, sexual abuse. So once the rapport is established to the certain length and extent, then we inquire about them. And in case of MSc, while the clinical interview, if they answer us a few things in a form of game session, where we make it as a game and fun way, and they answer well and good. If not, then we just mention it could not be elicited, and take all the behavioral and observations we have taken throughout the sessions to report it. And mostly information for the case history is given by the parents itself, or any other informant which is available.
Thank you so much, because it gives a very broad perspective to understand whenever a student should see this kind of information, that they can process it to a patient which is coming for them. So thank you so much, Janvi, to come on our platform, which give, because this session means a lot for every student who is having the clinical background of psychology. So thank you so much. I hope this session will help many more students to learn and we'll connect once again with your research projects if any are there to discuss and to learn from that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care.